With me is John Natick. John is a special constable with the Windsor Police Service and has been so for 7 years. And he's recently wrapped up a 30-year career as a reservist in the Canadian military. John, thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome.
John, you have an interesting military background in so much as you served 3 separate tours away from Canada in
Yes, I
military
did.
service. And I'm just wondering if you could, I know the first one was in Namibia, the second was in Bosnia, and then you wrapped it up with your 3rd tour in Afghanistan. Maybe you could just give us a bit of a description of the role that you served in each of those countries during your service.
Okay, well in Namibia, it was kind of an interesting story how we got there in the first place anyway. A message had come down to the regiment saying that our regular force sister regiment was going to Cyprus, and they were looking for guys to go, so a whole bunch of us signed up. And when none of us were picked, everybody was obviously in a bad mood, right? And then a message came down that we were going to go to Namibia, or somebody was. And so I put in for it. I figured I was going to go someplace anyway. I didn't even know where Namibia was. Honestly, I thought it was in the Middle East. I had no idea it was in southern Africa. So we get sent to Petawawa, which is about an hour and 45 minutes north of Ottawa, in February. And they decide that to get us ready to go to southern Africa, they put us on a winter warfare exercise. It was minus 42 out there. I don't see how that necessarily prepared us for that. So we had about 2 or 3 weeks of workup training, at a week leave, and then we went down to Namibia. Down there, I was involved with driving supplies from our main base in Windhoek, which was the capital city, up north to the supply guys up north.
Where there was deployment of personnel that needed.
Right, exactly. The idea was that the UN would provide security and that the South Africans could pull out of Namibia and then we would take care of things. But like most plans, this didn't work out quite that well. And April 1st, when the UN was supposed to take over, they weren't quite ready. But all of the guys, the SWAPO, which stood for the Southwest Africa People's Organization, they were the group that was fighting the South Africans for control of Namibia. They told other guys that on April 1st you can come home. What they didn't tell them was leave your guns behind. And yeah, so thousands of guys come pouring across the border with all of their weapons. Of course, the South Africans thought they were being invaded. So that was a very hectic week. It was,
they weren't, but obviously the fact that they had their weapons gave a totally different.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the agreement was that they were supposed to leave the weapons behind in Angola. That part didn't get passed down, so there was a lot of, in fact, the whole mission was almost scrubbed, and there was 43 of us over there ahead of time, and with no weapons or anything else.
Now, what year was this?
That was 1989.
1989. Yeah. Okay, so and how long were you over there?
6 months.
6 months,
Yeah.
and then you came back, and then you returned for a second tour in your capacity as a reservist to Bosnia.
Right.
When was that?
That was in 1994 to 95.
1994. And what was your role there in Bosnia?
There I was, my specific role, I was driving for our squadron liaison officer. So within our area of operation, we would go and visit all of the different Bosnian or Croatian, whoever was operating there, kind of let them know what we were doing so that they wouldn't shoot at us quite as often as they did. And then we also would liaise with the other UN outfits that were surrounding us.
So you kind of had to state your case that you weren't a threat, you were there on good terms, please don't shoot us.
Right, exactly.
And hope you got your point across before they got a chance to.
Yeah, oh no, that didn't matter. They
ask questions.
Well, they shot at us all the time anyway. Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Now, did your training at Petawawa, or did you train at Petawawa prior to this?
Right, yeah, for 3 months prior.
Okay. Were you aware that this was going to be a sort of a day-to-day risk, being shot at all the time?
No.
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 Okay, so you just had to adapt when you got there?
Very quickly, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so it's your dedication, obviously. So notwithstanding that, you come back, you stay in the reserves, and you then deploy out to Afghanistan.
Right. Yeah.
When was that?
That was in 2008. So that was 2008, 2009.
Okay, and what was your role in that?
I was a tactical CIMIC operator. For the whole tour, for the last half, I was also a sergeant major of a forward operating base.
Okay, and what were sort of the typical duties associated with that position?
First, let me explain what a CIMIC operator is. It's one of those crazy Army acronyms. CIMIC stands for Civil Military Cooperation. Same thing that Kenny Burt did. Basically, what we try to do is liaise with the locals. We're the kind of the interface between the Canadian military and the civilian population wherever we go. And we try to find out what we can do for the local population, trying to win like a hearts and minds type program. Yes, we can probably put a well in here, but we think you should be supporting the government instead of the Taliban. That type of thing, that in a nutshell.
Okay. Now, were there any common denominators, despite the fact your time in Namibia from the time in Afghanistan is 20 years apart? What were there had to be some common denominators, or or was it completely different?
It's completely each tour is completely different.
How about the people that you faced, the sort of the innocent victims of that lived there, that were just in the midst of this conflict, but not by choice?
Yeah, I think one thing you can say is people are people no matter where they are, whether it's the poor native guy that's living in his hut in northern Namibia, or the people that are being shot at daily by all the belligerents of Bosnia, or the guy that's just trying to raise his family in Afghanistan. That's all these guys want to do. It's all these people want to do. They want to raise their family with as little influence from anybody else. Just leave me alone and let me raise my family. And I don't think it's that much different from here. Really, wouldn't we all just we don't want to deal with all of this stuff. Just let me raise my family.
Right. On that note, family. A common thread that connects all veterans is the impact on family. Mm-hmm. You served 3 tours across the ocean, and what kind of impact did that have on your family life? Like, how did you balance all of that with your family members? Tell them you're going to be gone for 6 months at a time and that sort of thing.
Right. Well, at first you can understand that my wife wasn't that thrilled by the prospect, but at the time for Namibia, I wasn't. We weren't married yet, and so it's like, well, okay, go ahead and get it out of your system. And so, well, okay, go ahead.
I'm picturing how that might have been messaged, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, then, but see, when we were there was at that time there was no internet, that type of thing. So we could write all the letters we wanted to, but it would be about 3 or 4 week turnaround time. So by the time she answered a question that I may have asked, I don't even remember what the heck the question was because of the time. Yeah. Now in Bosnia, when the list originally came out for the guys who were going, I wasn't on the list. I was an alternative. And I remember going home and being, geez, I can't believe I didn't get picked and blah, blah. And she was very sympathetic. Oh, yes, dear, you probably should have been. And then one guy dropped out and I got the call. And then her whole attitude seemed to change. Like, what the hell do you mean you're going away again? But, she's very understanding, and we didn't have kids yet then. And then for Afghanistan, it was completely different. We had our son, but they were, like I said, they were very understanding. And of course, it was the internet, so we talked almost daily over Skype, unless somebody had been killed, and then they shut down all communications. Because you can appreciate, you say something to your wife, oh yeah, Bob got it today, and it's what a mess, and then she goes, oh geez, I just heard, and Bob's wife hasn't found out yet, so they cut all communication. So that's a message for all of us that are over this. Okay, who got it this time, kind of thing.
So there's an interesting kind of progression there from the time you're in Namibia, mm-hmm. to the time you're in Afghanistan. The level of technology had advanced so much that you're going from basically a letter rating communication process,
right.
which is what they used in World War II and
right, exactly.
and Vietnam, to but still in place in Namibia, mm-hmm. to Skype.
Right.
By the time you're full use of the internet, by the time
exactly.
you're in Afghanistan. Now, how old was your son when you were deployed to Afghanistan?
He would have been 7.
Okay, so pretty young.
Yeah.
Old enough to know maybe what was going on and knew your life as a reservist in
right.
some capacity.
Oh, exactly, yeah.
But at the same part, that time that a boy that age is going to really miss their dad for that length of time.
Sure, yeah.
But you used the Skype, so did you feel that was a really welcome piece of technology that kept you connected, even though you were miles and miles and times?
Oh, absolutely. It's something where it's reassuring for the family where they can look and they see you, right? You can't, if something happens, you can't hide, well, yeah, just a little neck shaving or something like that, eh? So, I mean, yeah, it's very honest, and, they see, and they can see, looking around you a little bit, what you're going through, eh?
Your training, you sort of answered this partially, but do you feel your training prepared you? You said in some cases, in the case of Bosnia, the part that people were shooting at you all the time mm-hmm. just didn't really come out of the training.
Well, there's a lot of things about Bosnia that we weren't prepared for.
So of the 3, would you say that was the most unpredictable
Absolutely.
Assignment?
Absolutely.
Okay. And what might have contributed to that? Was it just the nature of the civil unrest in that country at the time?
Yeah, and don't forget, politically, okay, we had just gotten over that whole Somalia thing a couple of years before. And the government let us know that if you had to shoot somebody, you better really be able to prove that you had to do it, or they didn't have a problem at all making an example of you, right? And so when you send guys into a combat zone like that, where you're afraid to even defend yourself, you know, that makes for a lot of issues after you come home.
I would think, see, that would be very difficult. You're trained to do a task, right up to the most serious task, take another person's
Absolutely,
life.
yeah.
Especially if your life is threatened or someone you're trying to safeguard. But when you know that, unless I can absolutely prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, my life's going to be miserable from this day forward if
Oh, exactly.
I'm proven to have not used my deadly force appropriately. To me, that adds an element of mental gymnastics, if I can use that term,
Sure.
that already is added to a pile that's much higher than an average Canadian.
Oh,
You're
absolutely.
in another country serving your country.
That's right.
On behalf of those who can't defend themselves.
Yeah, and don't forget too, I mean, added to that, the communication with home, all we got really was 2 15-minute phone calls a week, right? So even to try to ground yourself with somebody at home, you were shot at all the time. And then in our job, we would go around and actually visit some of the long-term care facilities where the locals were to see if there's something we can help them for. Like Christmas of '94, I spent visiting some of these places, you know, where they would take bandages off people that had just died, and I actually helped them wash some of them out, hang them out so they could use them on the next one that came through the door. That was my Christmas in '94, you know. And it's you go to some of these places and it's just, you know, a room this size, there'd probably be, you know, 15 people jammed in here all in beds, you know, and trying to get what kind of care they could. If it wasn't for us, you know, supplying, you know, some medicine and things like that, they would have died, all of them.
Now, that brings me to an interesting question. You're seeing a drastically different set of circumstances than you would ever be accustomed to in Canada.
Right.
What was it like, especially when you first went back to Canada each time, after Namibia, after Bosnia, after Afghanistan? Was there a bit of a rough patch?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Describe that for me a little bit.
Namibia was great. It was there wasn't a heck of a lot of threat after that initial instance there, but everything else was great. I mean, Namibia, you know, you're driving supplies back and forth, and you can look out the window and be like, a giraffe would be running beside the road. I mean, you don't see that every day here.
So the routine there became more of a, not as threatening.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
It was still, for lack of a better term, old-fashioned peacekeeping.
Okay.
Where, okay, you're wearing the blue hat, and people realize you were neutral, you were there to try to help, and they didn't shoot at you or anything.
And there was a respect for that, generally speaking.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're in Bosnia, we came, it was like something like 36 hours from when I was standing in Visoko in Bosnia to I was standing in my living room. That was it. There was no decompression, there was no nothing. And especially being a reservist, it was like, okay, we're finished with you, good luck.
Go home.
That was it, go home, good luck to you. And that was it.
What was that first few days, the first week like back home?
Well, you know, there's the euphoria, you're back home, you're with the people you love and everything else. But when they ask you, what was it like? There's no terms of reference. How can you possibly describe to your wife or anybody else in your family what it's like to be shot at constantly? To spend Christmas washing out bandages that you just pulled off of somebody who was dead, and you know, to help hang them a drum. Like, how do you explain that to people? So for a long time, I just didn't bother. But like many of the other veterans that I'm sure have been interviewed, you got to tell somebody about it. You got to get rid of that. And it wasn't until almost 10 years later that my daughter actually had lent me a book. She is called The Ghost of the Medak Pocket. She goes, she knows I wasn't there for that battle, but a lot of the same stuff. And after reading that, I started telling my family about it, and they had no idea.
So your daughter had at least some appreciation.
Oh, absolutely.
From reading that to what you might have experienced, better than if she had just had to hear it firsthand. Which you're right, it's hard to, for someone that's not there and has no concept of what it's hard to relay that accurately and
Oh,
see the
absolutely.
impact. Did you see an increase or an improvement in sort of the human rights aspect level in these countries after you left, from the time that you were there? Did you? That part of it seems to be something that we take for granted here in Canada, but is something that is marginalized in terms of its the weight it's given to individuals who live in some of these countries? Did you see any impact that way?
I really don't know about Namibia. Yes, everything worked out fine. There wasn't a lot of bloodletting when they got their independence or anything like that. As a matter of fact, Namibian soldiers are now participating in UN missions, which I think is fantastic. Bosnia, I'm assuming that things went, but I'll be honest with you, once I left that country, I didn't want anything else to do with it. I said, I told my family, like, I would be happy to go back to Bosnia as a tourist, or not Bosnia, but Namibia, and hell, I'd even like to go back to Afghanistan. But if I never set foot in Bosnia again, I'll be just as happy.
That's very interesting because, I don't think that perspective comes out very often, but it just shows that you don't have to be there very long to see the drastic differences from what you have here in Canada.
Oh, absolutely.
To tell you that, boy, I'm glad I'm a Canadian and not a Bosnian, I guess.
Oh, absolutely.
John, to kind of summarize things, is there one point or message that you feel with all your 30 years of military service, is there one point that you feel you can pass on to those who are watching this? All ages, of course, but particularly young people.
I think service to your country is one of the highest callings that anybody can have. And I mean, sure, there's a sense of adventure. You do things that you normally wouldn't do. But I guess I get a lot of that from my family. We weren't what you would call a military family, but every time some war broke out, they all volunteered. I had a great uncle that was at Vimy Ridge, passionate. We're very proud of that. And I guess it's just carrying on the tradition. And my daughter is now in the regular army. And, if they're the next ones out the door, that, so either Syria or Malawi or wherever it is they're going to go. So it's just, I guess it's just something that we do, something that, you pay the price of citizenship. This isn't free. All the stuff that we have here, that was bought and paid for by past generations. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to do what you can to preserve that for the next generations.
Good point. John Native, thank you very much for your time
You're welcome,
today.
sir.
Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
With me is Senior Constable Mike Acapata. He's been with the Windsor Police Service for 17 years, actually almost 18 years. He's also been with the military as a Master Corporal for 26 years. Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Barry.
We appreciate your time. Mike, perhaps we could start things off by having you describe what your role was that you served overseas in Afghanistan with the military.
I was in Afghanistan with 2nd Battalion Royal Canadian Regiment in 2007, and I worked in Force Protection Platoon. I was an RG-31 vehicle commander. The RG-31 is a South African anti-mine vehicle, and what our responsibilities were is in 2007 everything moved by road, so we would escort Canadian convoys through the area of operation. So it was food, bullets, or people. We would drive, and the Taliban would attack the convoys, and it was our responsibility to ensure that our convoys made it through to their desired destination.
Did that also involve possibly running into improvised explosive devices as well? Or?
Our biggest threat was the improvised explosive device. What it was is any type of explosive, they bury them under the road. We would have an example, we had a convoy that was 3.2 kilometers long and 100-meter vehicles spacing and things of that nature. You can only go through so many places, and a lot of our, on my tour, a lot of Canadians were hurt and killed by these devices planted in the road. It could have been a landmine, it could have just been a simple explosive, but we drove around never knowing if the ground was going to envelop our vehicle or if it was going to be a close call. But it was well worth it, in my opinion, to do the tasks that needed to be done.
So how long were you there? How long was your tour?
I got there in January, and I was home in August, so just a little bit around. Was that 8 months?
8 months, approximately 8 months. So in 8 months, 22 of your fellow countrymen died.
Yes.
During the time that you were there, between January and August of that year.
Yeah, Roto 3 suffered some very traumatic IED strikes. We had an accidental discharge that killed one of the first people on my tour. We had a Special Forces gentleman fall from an antenna in Kandahar City, but the vast majority of the 22 were killed by IEDs.
And obviously there's just one of the most difficult aspects with trying to safeguard against an IED or an improvised explosive device is the complete unknown and random nature of them, correct? Like there's not some known pattern of where they're installed and that sort of thing. It's just, and you're in a country where you don't know the roads, you don't know the layout, and that would make that even more challenging. Mike, I'm just wondering, 22 people died. You weren't one of them, obviously, but you could have been.
Yes.
That thought must have crossed your mind a couple of times.
Well, I think the first time it crosses your mind is for me, the first convoy we went out on, because it was unique and it was different. I think that anybody who says they're not afraid the first time you leave the base or go outside the wire is a liar. And I think that probably the scariest one was the last one. Because like I said, so many coalition troops, not only Canadians, have been killed, that when they tell you it's your last operation, if you're a fatalist, you believe this is the last chance that they have to try to get me. And I remember our last operation, and there was an air of, it was a difficult operation because everyone was thinking the same thing. Is this it? Because this is the last one. I think though that you reflect on your mortality, on your belief system, on fate, and I did not go there to be killed, so I believe that I was not going to be, and simply put, had I been left a foot or right a foot, the outcome might have been different, but I was very lucky, and luckily the 42 people in my section also all made it home in one piece as well.
So I think the circumstances you just described go beyond what a normal Canadian might think of the requirements of somebody who's serving for their country in a modern day war situation like Afghanistan. The obvious comes to mind. You got to be physically fit.
Mm-hmm.
You go there, it's torturously hot, it's dusty, it's all of this. You're walking, miles on end, things like that. But I think the picture you've painted diminishes that almost to nothing compared to the mental toughness. When you say a person with a fatalistic sort of perspective is like, oh gosh, it's now come. I've been here 7.5 months, almost 8 months, and this is my last sort of convoy before I get to go back home. Or is it really my last, not just convoy, but everything? And your mind starts to play with you in that regard. And if you're not mentally tough, that can be something that's very challenging. I'm wondering, as you process that, you're a father, a husband, you've got 2 kids and a wife who's also a police officer. You're thinking about them. You've been there several months. Give us an idea of what you were thinking and how did you stay focused on the mission? But at the same time, you're human.
Yes.
And you're a dad and you're a husband. How do you stay focused in light of everything that's happening? And 22 of your countrymen have passed away.
Well, I think for me, focus was pretty simple. When you're section commander, you were responsible for the number of people you take care of. And I didn't have the luxury of worrying about myself. I was worried about these guys because I was responsible for them. It was crystal clear to me through the chain of command that I was given the privilege of leading somebody else's troops. They weren't mine, they were the task force commanders. And he was quite clear that he expected all of his section commanders to perform with his men in a certain level. I think for me, my son had a hernia operation when I was in Afghanistan, and I think that was the one day that I actually felt sorry for myself for not being home at the hospital to hold his hand. And I think that...
How old was he?
He was 2.
2 years old.
Yeah. And I reflected when I was there, and that day I was up at the front gate, and an ambulance pulled in, and they brought this one young girl, about 7 or 8, who stepped on a landmine, so she lost her leg below the knee. And I looked at this young girl, and I'll tell you, it was wallowing in self-pity is the best way to describe it. And I looked at this young girl, and I thought about my son back home in Windsor, in a hospital that was clean, that had running water, cable. He was surrounded by his family. My father's a general surgeon, so my father was there. He needed nothing. And he did not need me there as much as I wanted to be there. And I looked down at this small Afghan girl who lost her leg in a landmine, and it came slapping to me about how good we in Canada have our life to be. My children never need to worry about explosives or the house blowing up or playing soccer in a soccer pitch and all of a sudden they step on a landmine. That's not part of their reality. And that was a day that I acknowledged that my responsibility was to try to bring some semblance of normalcy with the life that we enjoy to other people. Not to change their views, but to let them experience maybe quiet or peace. Because no matter who you are, that's all you want, is your family to grow and prosper. And I think that those were the days that have changed how I view country and responsibility, because until you think you believe things, until you're put face to face with what you say you believe, and you see people who don't have that opportunity.
You've painted a very unique picture. It's hard to gain perspective when you don't know anything other than what you've always been accustomed to your whole life. The Afghan girl has grown up in that, doesn't have any idea what life in Canada might be like because she's never experienced it. You come over, you've had the upbringing and the life in Canada, your kids are enjoying that, my kids are enjoying that because of others who have served and because of the country we live in. And then you see the difference, and it's drastically different because you have the benefit of comparison. And you're right, it's hard for a Canadian child to even grasp that they would step on a landmine. Now, that's just not something that's even remotely likely in Canada.
That's right. And as a parent, imagine, for me, I'd use the word guilt. I feel bad when they scuff their knee on my rollerblades that I bought for them, let alone you send your child to draw water because there's now been a new well installed and you hear an explosion and you go running and there is your child who's hit a landmine. We in Canada wrap our children in plastic and bubble wrap to let them go out on their bikes or their big wheels. And we never worry about them not coming home when you hear an explosion off in the distance. And you brought up being a parent, and I think that's what it's about. Every parent wants their child to be safe. And in this case, part of my children's safety and the security of this country was going to Afghanistan to follow up on Canada's mission and commitment to try to bring stability to that area of the world.
So that sounds like that was a very passionately rooted reason or cause as to why you served, and notwithstanding the fact you've been in the military for 26 years, but you probably didn't foresee this responsibility on the horizon. Certainly when you started, perhaps, but at least in the nature in which you described it. But was that a motivation for you that these are people who don't have any other choices, and they rely on a country like Canada or someone from one of the other coalition countries to come in and help them. Otherwise, their life is just very, very dark. Would you say that?
Well, I agree. But for me, my motivation came from the fact that there's things that I've enjoyed in this country. And if somebody asked me why I went, I was working with the Windsor Police. I had a wonderful assignment in the training branch. I was achieving operationally what I needed here, but I recognize that there's other people who've gone before me who've given me certain things, and that freedom is a tangible thing, and the right that we can do a video, or we could disagree, or I can vote politically, or we can have religious beliefs, was inspired and secured by someone else. So for me, it wasn't the task that I was going to do, it was the task of accepting and repaying the people who went before me so that I can enjoy what I have. Not knowing how much I had until I got to Afghanistan, but knowing that the hundreds of thousands of Canadians who've gone before, I owe them something. And I owed them enough that when it was my turn, I could not turn my back on what they had given me. So what you brought up, Barry, is something that I learned when I was in country, but my reason for going was it was a necessity for me. It wasn't an option, it was something that I had to do because my upbringing or living the life I've led, it was my turn to serve, and I had a responsibility to do nothing more than hundreds of thousands of other people did.
So when the baton was handed to you, you reached back and took it. Mike, your military service of approximately 26 years, right in approximately the middle of that was the events of 9/11.
Yes.
So perhaps give us just a glimpse of did your perspective change? What did that do? You've been in the military for 12 or 13 years. Now you've been in for almost the same amount of time. That critical date, what did that do for you? What did that mean to you?
9/11, I was going to VIP at a VIP school.
Our Values, Influences, and Peers training program
for grade 6s.
Students.
The first plane struck as I was driving into the school. I went into the school that day and I spoke to the students about how the world had changed. The second plane struck and I left to come downtown believing that we're going to be deployed. On that day, in Windsor, we were on the flight path towards Detroit International Airport. And as I pulled in to HQ, all of the planes were on the Canadian side of the border, which was unheard of. Large civilian aircraft were flying low and were circling. Military aircraft from Selfridge, F-16 Fighting Falcons, were going up the Detroit River. My wife then was a customs officer, and they were rerouting aircraft to land at Windsor Airport because they closed Canadian and American airspace to all flights and they were going to land. So on that day, I sat in the main office with a number of other officers who'd come expecting to do something. My wife called me and said that they closed the border and that she was going to the airport to clear international flights and she didn't know when she was coming home. When we got home, much like everyone else, I watched it over and over and over again. And through simply being a policeman, I had friends who were on NYPD and we couldn't call them. I have relatives in New York City, couldn't call them, didn't know who was alive, didn't know who was dead, but recognized the fact that someone had struck us. I realize it's the United States. When I say us, I mean our way of life. Our free, interactive way of life where I can disagree with you. And I knew then that something was going to happen. I didn't know what, but I also knew that the world had changed that day. I knew that living on a border city, that the relationship that we had with our colleagues to the north, from Windsor's perspective, had changed. And that to stand by, even as a policeman, that people were now aware that the monster under the bed had raised its ugly head.
Mike, you, shifting gears just a little bit, your, the training that you had, which seemed to kick in automatically on that day. You described the event vividly, like it just happened yesterday, even though it was 12 years ago. Do you feel that the training that you had, both police and in your military training, prepared you for the situations that you faced in Afghanistan and even in your life as a police officer?
I think so. One of the things that the Army teaches you is routine and discipline. And I think every police officer has to go through routines when they deal with people, but being a police officer also teaches you compassion. I've dealt with victims and I've dealt with accused people. And as a policeman, you side with the victim, and sometimes you look at the accused and you understand the term "there before the grace of God go I." As a soldier, you have that degree of separation from the person who's shooting at you. Did I understand what they were doing? Of course I did. I'm a student of history. Did I understand why it was important when the children came up to us to hand them a chocolate bar? Yes, I did, because they saw our uniform and our maple leaf, and they understood that we were there for them. And I think how we teach police officers to interact with the public and how we teach police officers to be compassionate with victims spilled into the green side of my life. And I'd like to believe that I treated every Afghan that I met, regardless of what the capacity that we met with a degree of compassion, with the hope that anything that I did would leave a positive legacy based on the flag that I wore on my sleeve. So without a doubt, Barry, the two cross over, and I think it's made me a better soldier and a better policeman for the two different jobs I'm allowed to do.
On that note, very quickly, how would you summarize the single greatest message or point that you can make to, based on your experience, both, but particularly your military experience, that you can share or relay to people of all ages, but particularly young people?
I think that young people need to acknowledge a few things, and that the line, I would say, is that freedom isn't free, and that there's a price that was paid by someone for what we have. You don't need to become a soldier. It's not for everyone. But you need to revel in what this country is given. You need to strive. You need to achieve. You need to do something. Be the best nurse. Find a cure for cancer. Build a better water purification system. You have the opportunity by fluke of being born in a country where there are no limits set on you because of your race, creed, color, gender, anything. Revel in it and run with it, because you owe the people who aren't here. You owe the hundreds of thousands of Canadians that lost their lives for you to be here to succeed them, because they don't have that chance. We need to live every day and remember that somebody gave their life so that we can choose to do certain things. And if you choose to make this country better, then their legacy lives on and you appreciate the freedoms that you have.
Well said. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate your time today. With me is Senior Constable Ken Burt. Ken has been with the Windsor Police Service going on about 15 years now. He's also served in the Canadian military for approximately 20 years. Ken, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Ken, would you describe for us your role in your service in Afghanistan, specifically in your tour of Afghanistan? Maybe when that was and what exactly did you do? What was your role?
I was with the provincial reconstruction team. From my deployment lasted roughly from August of 2008 until February of 2009. And my role was as a CIMIC team leader. CIMIC is a acronym for Civil Military Cooperation. And what we were tasked to do as part of the provincial reconstruction team is my team would go into a specific area and try to identify what would be considered consent-winning activities as part of a counterinsurgency operation.
Give us an example of what a consent-winning, whatever you just said.
Okay, so there's phases of conflict, and there's invariably, to just kind of dull it down, there's a conflict phase and there's a rebuilding phase, and then there's the follow-on parts after that. After the main conflict goes through, what we want is for the average citizen to get back to a normal life, to have a job, have a place for them to live, to be able to educate their kids. Because when people's lives are getting back to normal, they're more willing to believe that the new governmental system is going to work for them, and therefore be less interested in engaging in conflict. And that's kind of just the very simplest idea of counterinsurgency. An insurgent is someone who fights against the established order, but they always have, there's something that they bring to the table that resonates with people. And if the people didn't believe them to a certain extent, they wouldn't help them, they wouldn't tolerate them, they wouldn't have a chance. So the idea is whatever it is that they're bringing to the table, you try to make sure that you get there first. And again, then you try to help win the people for that place. In Afghanistan, because of the impoverished conditions and the general lack of order for many, many years following the Soviet conflict, we were trying to just help people get jobs and help educate the kids, get the school system, just get any infrastructure that would be recognizable by it's just taken for granted what we have here as part of being in Canada. Over there, it's luxuries. It's just a simple thing as sending your child to school, being able to go to a hospital. That's stuff for rich people, and it's stuff that everyone should have, and it's what they all want.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned from the Soviet involvement there, and that goes back a little while. I remember that, and it caused a boycott of the Olympic Games and other things. It had world impact, and here's a country that's now, history's repeating itself almost in terms of that unrest, that chaos, the lack of safety, and the very common things that an everyday person hopes and expects for their family, kids being able to go to school, a house, that kind of thing, is a luxury, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the key to your deployment and your company's deployment was to get there first, so to speak, to make sure that your case could be made first and you'd have that influence. Were there times where you weren't first, or you cut it too close that it was, made the task a lot more daunting?
Well, I don't think it can really honestly be expressed in terms of even this conflict, whether it's Op Archer or Operation Enduring Freedom or any of that. The Afghan people, and again, frequently people talk about Afghanistan, but what they're probably meaning is Kandahar, because that is the province which Canada was primarily operating in, and that's the toughest part of all of Afghanistan because of the Pashtun tribal element that's there. So talking in terms of the province of Kandahar, that is a people that have been largely autonomous to the tune of hundreds, if not thousands of years. They have a social code, the Pashtunwali, that it predates Islam, and it permeates every facet of their life. So,
did you know that going in?
We did.
Okay, so your training, you had some.
We had cultural awareness and just
because that would be, if you didn't, I would think that would make your job pretty tough.
Yeah.
Because that's not something you encounter every day, that's for sure.
Sure.
Kind of a thing.
And it's, again, with a people whose culture is truly, call it even ancient, they have long memories. And, going right back through to Genghis Khan, someone or other has come into that place, tried to take it over and make it better, whether for their own gain or for the people there. And I think folks there are fairly wary of people coming in, being helpful, and then just bailing on them. And ultimately, they are the ones that live there, and they are the ones that have to feed their kids and,
Right.
and keep people safe and happy. So for us to go in there with all good intentions and truly wanting to help, they have to see it and believe it for literally generations.
Yeah, it's not a quick fix then, in other words,
No,
obviously.
not even close.
That's interesting how that seems like that would be a big obstacle to the role that you played in all the different deployments and work that was done in Afghanistan, in terms of you're going up against a situation where there's years and years and years of history that's built up walls of resistance to trying to accept, even though you went there, like you said, with the best of intentions. They don't know that, and it's hard for them to just expect to just turn around and believe you right off the bat when you're not from their country, you don't understand their culture.
Sure.
Or even if you do, they're not going to think you do because you're not from there.
Yep.
Ken, you were there for 6 or 7 or 8 months from the time that you described. Were you married at the time?
I was.
You were. Any children?
Yeah, I've got 2 kids.
Were any of them born during the time that you were deployed?
No.
Okay, but you were married. Your wife is also a police officer.
Yes.
How did that?
Still married, in case she's watching.
Okay,
I don't want
good.
to end up in a jackpot.
Wonderful. How did that play into things? I mean, that had to be difficult. You're going to go. You're not just going to a police training thing at the police college for a couple of weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
But you could come home on weekends. You're going for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 months. And
It was actually it was longer than that, because we had an 8-month workup at CFB Petawawa, which is